Good morning. We're learning as a schus for Shlema Filana Chaya Basarach, and as a schus for the neshama of Meir ben Elazar. Oh, Shalom. We are on Daf Nun Hey Amid Beis, 7 lines in the top. Amri b'marava. It said in Eretz Yisrael, Kol ha-koisel b'reya kosher b'kulya. Whatever is possible we find that those things that are possible by the lungs is still kosher by the kidneys. Shari nikav possible b'reya v'kosher b'kulya. Because a hole, a puncture in the lungs, as we very well know, passels the lungs, but it doesn't passel the kidneys. Therefore, anything that would be kosher on the lungs would also be kosher on the kidneys. Zok the Gemara, Maskeflor of Tanchuma, Baklalahu, can you really make such a rule? Bari Mugla, what about pus? The kosher bereyu, possible. We had talked about where you find certain types of imperfections in the lungs that are filled with pus. They don't passel by the lungs, and they do passel by the kidneys. Rashi quotes the Gemara, Smugl Ksher Bereya, and Dafna Memches, and possible kolya also on Daf Memches. Mayim zakim b'ksherim, and also what about when it's not pus, it's not actual infection, but it's a clear fluid that's found in the lungs and in the kidneys that's kosher. So Taisus quotes from Rashi, Bari mayim zakim b'ksherim hacha pirsha kunchishlo yadana mai kosher. Rashi says, I don't know what's the kasha from you just saying they're the same. So how is that a kasha? That comes from a disease. And it's kosher by a kidney, and you don't learn it out from pus. We don't. So obviously you don't learn. Our teretz is going to be, it's not so much a kasha, the second thing, but it's more right to what the eventual answer is going to be, or the conclusion, which is that it's clear that we can't compare, as we've seen a number of times, you can't compare different types of trephis. You can't say kal v'chaimers on trephis, because each part and each animal in each case is distinct. Each organ is distinct. So we see for the fact zaken itself is a raya that we can't learn out one thing from the other. That even though there is a lakusa, there is some kind of infection or disease, it still does not pass. Alam Ravashi. So the Gemara continues. This is the taka the teretz that the Gemara gives. Alam Ravashi trefus commandments ladadi. You're trying to compare one treva to another. Ein ayim b'treva zu daim lezu. You don't compare shari chaytcha mikan umeisa chaytcha mikan v'chaysa. You could get a cut in one place and it's kosher. Rashi, one place and it dies. Rashi says, if you cut the simanim or the gid in its neck, and on the other hand, if you cut it on its leg, it will live. So vice that there's no comparison. And the Gemara asks, is it really true that if there's clear liquid found in the lungs and in the kidneys, it's kosher? And that was only said el detzili, if it's clear. Avalakiri, if it's a cloudy liquid, if there's any cloudiness in that liquid trefa. V'chitzili nami loyamaran, and if it's clear, we didn't say el delay sariach, that there's no putrescence, it didn't start to turn bad. Avasariach, if it got rotten, trefa. That's a siman trefa. Hakolya shektina bedaka ad kapul, a kidney that shriveled up in a small animal until it reaches the size of a bean, begasa ad ka'anova beinunis, and by a large animal until the size of a large grape. But if it got even smaller than that, it's going to be possible. This next part, they put into a parentheses. We'll read it quickly. If the bottom jaw was taken away, the Mishnah had said that if you take away the lower jaw of an animal, it's not a treifa. We're in the Mishnah of Elu Ksheris. So it says that's only if you could still feed the animal by forcing the food down its gullet. Otherwise, obviously, it's going to starve to death. Then it's a treifa. The Mishnah says, "Nitla ha'im shalah." If the womb of the animal was taken out, tani hi ha'im hi tapachas hi shlal chufet. These all mean the same thing. These all mean the womb. The charusa b'dei shamayim ksheira. The Mishnah said, if an animal has its lungs shriveled, b'dei shamayim means it gets a fright, let's say from thunder or lightning, that's kosher because that will return. It'll go back. It's obviously something the animal's used to and it can recover from. Tanarabana ezu recharusa kol shetzamka reyeshala b'dei shamayim. Charusa is whatever the animal's lungs shriveled up through a natural act. Ksheira, that's kosher. B'dei adam, but if it happens from a person startles an animal and its lungs shriveled, treifa. Doesn't recover from that. Rav Shimon Elazar says, not even through any barrier. It doesn't have to be like a thunder and light, or it doesn't have to be whatever. We'll see what it doesn't have to be. It could be through any being, any kind of animal. Is he saying that even though we said whatever got scared from Bidei Shemayim is kosher. And he's saying even not just if it was like thunder or lightning, but even if it was for another animal, as long as it's not a person, it's going to be kosher. Is it going on the seifa that we said that if it got scared by an animal, by a person, it's going to be a treifa. I was saying the same thing as by a wild animal will also be a treifa. Tashma, the Tanya, Charusa b'dei Adam treifa, Rav Shimon Elazar b'dei kol habrius. So we say that it's going on the treifa on the second part, that not just a person, but any being, any creature that scares it is also going to have a din of a charusa b'dei adam, that it's going to be a treifa. Rabbi Bachan have a ka'azal b'midbara. He was going in the midbar ashkechanu dichri that samik reya to do. He found these small goats that their lungs were shriveled. Also shal be midrasha. They went and asked him in the base. They brought it to the base medrash to ask Amulei bekaita. They didn't have any way of determining what shriveled it up, so they didn't know whether it should be kosher or possible. So Amulei bekaita I see mishkali chiyuri. During this summer when it's hot, bring white buckets umalinu mayakuri and bring cold water in it, and leave it in there for 24 hours. If it returns, if it inflates and it reverses the shriveling, then we must assume that it happened b'dei shamayim, and it's kosher. And if not, it's a treifa. Vesisusa in Vesisua in the winter, I see Mishkali Shikumi bring a black vessel, Malinu Mayapshuri, and put it in lukewarm water, and leave it for 24 hours. And if it returns, it's kosher. If not, it's treifa. We just gave the different ways to do it in the winter and the summer, and we want it to end up not being too hot. So in the summer, you have to take a cup. You put in cold water, and you put in a white kli so that it shouldn't absorb too much heat. And in the winter, you start with lukewarm water, and you don't want it to get too cold, so you do things to keep it warmer. Hagluda, we said in the Mishnah, another thing that's kosher is a animal that was skinned. Tan Rabban, Hagluda, Remeir Machshav Achamim Paislim. The Gluda Remeir says it's kosher, and the Chum say it's possible. Farheid Elazar Safra, Yechon ben Gudgada, Ala Gluda Shapsula. They both testify on the Gluda that it's possible. Shimon Elazar, Chazabay Remeir. If Shimon Elazar says Remeir was chayzer on his original statement, even though Remeir said it was kosher, in the end he was chayzer and said it's treif. It's like the Mar Machalder of Shimon Elazar, polygram Meir begluda. Baista said he must have been chaylik if he was chayzer. But Tanya Remeir, Tanya Amr of Shimon Elazar, lenechlik Remeir v'cham ala gluda shepsula. That Remeir and the Chum were not chaylik on the gluda, that it's possible. They both agree that it's possible. Kfar Hayed Rabbi Shia Benoisha Rabbi Yehuda Abbasam L'ftei Rabbi Akiva Mishum Reb Tafan Al Gdula Shepshula V'Mishayeh Kesela Ksheira. And if there's leftover, they say a different sheet that if there's leftover at least one, not a different sheet, I guess, like the ones who say it's possible, but it's only possible if it's fully gone. But if there's even the amount of skin of a sela, the size of a sela, it's kosher. But in any case, we see Remeir both agree that it's possible. So how can we say Remeir was chayzer?
Why didn't we just ask someone Mishnah?
We didn't. That wasn't Reb Shimon Elazar.
Oh, you're saying?
Tanya Amr Reb Shimon Elazar le'nechleku Remeir v'chachamim.
Yeah.
When he says Leinechelku in the Brisa, Reb Shimon Elazar is taka saying that Remeir was chayzer. Amar Mar, im nishtaya by Kesela Ksheira. We had quoted in that Brisa that if there's a leftover sela's worth of skin, a coin of a sela's worth of skin, then even though a fully skinned animal is going to be treifa, but if that much is left, it's kosher. Heicha, where does it have to be? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, we're going to see a number of different sheets on this. Apnei hashedra kula. It has to be on the entire length of the spine. Ibaylahu, the arch, the cotton, does it mean that it's a long, thin line of skin? Because it says on the whole spine, that's obviously much longer than a sela. So that means that it's the area that it covers is a total of the sela, but it's spread out in a long line over the spine. What does it mean? That has to be a sela's width over the entire shedder, which is obviously much more than really just one cell. Tashma, this whole thing is just very fantastic to me. The idea that an animal could survive being skinned under any circumstances. So I'm not really understanding any of this. I can't bring this into any kind of reality that I know. Tashma, the parish of Nuroy Mishmei the Shmuel, v'roichav sneh sela apnei kol hasedra kula. He said that it's talking about. He says specifically that it's talking about the width of a sela on the length of the entire shedder. Rabbi Bachana Amar, he says a different shita. So the first shita was that it has to be, this sela's worth has to be on the spine. Rabbi Bachana Amar Roshi Prokim, he says it has to be one sela l'chayra on each of the joints of the animal. Wherever the bones stick out, there has to be a sela's worth of skin. Rabbi Elazar ben Antignus, Mishum Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yanai, Makam Tibura. It has to be on its navel. Boy, it seems that it would regenerate. They say it would regenerate if you had that much skin. Boy, Rabbi Yanai, Rabbi Yishma, Nitul Makam Hashedra, V'Kula Kayim. Nito Makam Tibura V'Kulakayim, Nidlu Rashi Praka V'Kulakayim. What if instead of that all that was left was just on the spine according to that mandamar, or just on the navel according to that mandamar, um, or on just on the joints according to that mandamar. Instead, it was that every place was it had skin except for those spots. What's the din? That means are these places where it's more able to regenerate, so therefore they're favored. But certainly, if it has almost all the skin except for that, that would be fine, because that place will certainly regenerate. Or is it that those are necessities in order for the rest of it to regenerate? So Gemara Teku. Amara. Kala ar kulai matzel begluda. This is I guess a fifth sheet, right? We saw the three previous sheetas, and we saw the shedra. I guess we saw three sheetas: the shedra, and the makam tiburoi, and the rashi prakim. Now we're saying kalar kulei matzel begluda. Any place, as long as you have a kaselas it's going to be kosher. Chutzmi beis haparsis, except for the skin by the bottom part of the leg of an animal. The parsis is technically the hoof, but as we're going to see from the oncoming Gemara, this is a part of the skin that's very soft, and it's almost like the flesh of the animal. And you need to have skin in order to regenerate other skin. It can't be something that's similar to flesh. So this arbeis aparsis, he says, is an exception. Even though any skin anywhere, as long as it's the size of a cell, it can save, in that area it won't save. Rav Yochanan afilu arbeis aparsis nami matzel. Rav Yochanan says even there it's going to save. Ba minei ravasim Rav Yochanan arbeis aparsis mal. We asked him this question: what if there's skin only left on the bottom part of the leg of the animal? Mal sheyatzel begluda. Should it save an animal from becoming a treifa? Amalei matzel, he says it does save, which comports with what we just saw. Amalei lemantenu rabbeinu, but you had taught us. Elu she'erisei kibsara. This is what you taught us about which there are certain parts of the animal that their skin is like their flesh, which has repercussions as far as tumah. Only the basar of an avela is metama. The skin, if you have a glove of an avela, it's not matama. If you have a baseball glove made out of the skin of a cow, it's not matama. So there are some parts of the skin that are considered like basar, and therefore they're soft, and they're considered like basar, and therefore they're matama. Arbeis haparsis. You taught us that the arbeis haparsis is like the flesh. So how could you say now that by putting that if you have a little bit of skin left, even the parsis, it's going to regenerate the skin in the rest of the animal? If you don't consider it to be part of the skin, you consider it to be part of the flesh. Amalei al takniteni, don't ask me from that brisa that I taught you. I was saying that only according to a shitas yachad, but it's not the rabbim that we pass them like the Tanya, because really the truth is that the base haparsis is considered to be part of the skin, according to the Chacham. The Tanya, Ashoichet es ha'oila lahakter kazayis. Someone shechts an oila, and he has in mind to be makter kazayis mi arshal tachas alya, from the skin that's underneath the alya, which is underneath the tail. Chutzlam kaimai, if he has in mind to do a chutzlam kaimai pasal ve'en be'karas chutzlazmani, pigel v'chayven alav karas. That's considered to be flesh, and therefore it's going to have the din as if you had in mind to bring from the carbon chutzlazmana or chutzlam kaimai, as the case may be, and then it'll be pasal or pigel, as the case may be. But that's the only one, according to the Tanakama, who is the rabbin. That's the only case of the Ar Tachas Alya. But the Beis HaParsos, he would not consider to be part of the basar of the animal. Elazar ben Yehuda ish iblis. Amar mishum Rabbi Yaakov. He said b'shem Rabbi Yaakov. V'chein hayi Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda ish ichos. Amar mishum Rabbi Shimon. He said b'shem Rabbi Shimon. Echad ar beis aparsis v'echad ar harosh shall egel harach. Both the ar beis aparsis and the ar of the skin on the head of a young calf. V'echad ar shall tachas alya, as well as certainly the ar that's underneath the tail. V'chol shemanu chachamim gabi tuma, and anything that chachamim say legabi tuma, elu she're saying of sarin that we treat them like basa legabi metama, which is lahevi ar beis habayis, which comes to include also the ar of the private parts of a female. All of these are treated like basa. So these manda amrim, these are the two individual manda amrim that Rabbi Yochanan was quoting from before, that you heard from me. I was saying that they are a yochid, but we don't paskin like them. We paskin like the Tanakama, who's the rabbi. Zok the Mishnah. Elu treifus ba'oif. These are treifus by an oif. And generally the rule is that a treifa by an oif, as we're going to see, is the same as by a behema. We just mentioned certain things that one might think. One difference between an oif and a behema is that an oif, if you shecht one siman, it's sufficient. So vice says the animal dies more quickly. So maybe it should also become a treifa more quickly. So el treifus ba'oif nekuvas haveshet upsukas hagargeras. If there's a hole in the veshet, in the trachea, which is the din that we see by an animal, upsukas hagargeras, and a cutting of the kana of the trachea. Hiksa chulda al roisha. If a chulda bit the head of an oif, makam sha'oisa oisa treifa, in a place that makes it a treifa, meaning analogous to a behema, where we said that if there's a hole in the skull of the behema that goes through the krum, which is the membrane surrounding the moich, the brain of the animal, it's going to be a treifa. So if the weasel bit a oif on the head of a oif, and it went through the skull and into the membrane, that's going to make it a treifa. Nikav hakurkavan, if there's a hole in the gizzard. Nikvu hadaken, if there's a hole in the intestines. Naflu ar v'nechmru b'nei me'ayim, if it fell into the fire, a live bird, and the innards, meaning all the insides of the bird got singed. Im yuroikim sulums, they turned green or yellow or different colors. They're puzzle. Im adumim kshem, but if they are red, they're kosher. Darsa v'tarfa v'kaisel. This is really the din of nefula that we had earlier, which is that if an animal falls, we have to, we have different sheetas, but essentially you have to wait 24 hours to make sure it wasn't shocked. And if it survives 24 hours, or if it gets up and walks, that it's not a treifa, but there's no such thing as a bird falling because it flies. So darsa betarfa b'kaisel. If someone jumped on a bird, or if it got banged into a wall, or sheritza behema, or an animal crushed it, and it's still fluttering, which is, I guess, similar to if the animal stood up but it didn't walk. V'shasa me'es la'es, and you waited 24 hours, v'shachta, and you shechted sherev, just like the din of the nefula. We're going to go back to the din of nekuvas haveshet psukas agaris is analogous to an animal, but the next thing we said was if they got bit by a weasel, we don't know if it went through the membrane of the surrounding the moich. Rab ushmuel v'levi the amri machnes yadi lefnim ubayde. He can stick his hand into the mouth of the bird, this dead bird, after you shecht it, and you put pressure on the other side of the brain of the animal. If it squeezes out through a hole in the where it had been bitten by the weasel, treifa. That means that the bite had gone through the membrane, and therefore the actual brain is squeezing through the hole. If not, it's kosher. That's good according to Mandam that says there are actually two membranes around the brain, both which we had earlier legabe a animal. Now we're talking about by a bird. So there's a machlekes of whether you have to make a hole in both membranes or just one. So according to Mandam, it says you have to have not just the outer membrane was pierced, but also the bottom, the lower membrane. Then we understand that it's going to squeeze out because there's a hole through both membranes. According to the Mandam, it says that if there's a hole even in the upper membrane, even though it didn't go through the lower krum, how does this bedika help? You'll push, but maybe it won't go through the bottom membrane because it wasn't pierced, but it's still a treifa. Look at me know. He said the inkavi tata agav rukba mifka. Because of the pressure that will burst through, the bottom membrane was relatively thin, and the pressure would open it up once the top one was pierced. Amar Ziri, Ein bezdika l'cholda b'nei shinea dakas. Ziri said, there's no bedika for a weasel because its teeth are very sharp. He disagrees. He says it's not going to help to make this bedika because since it makes such a small hole, it's not going to necessarily squeeze through. What difference does it make if it's still squeezed through? He said, no, it's not just that they're thin, but they're also curved, and therefore the hole in the upper and lower membrane don't necessarily line up, and therefore it's making a small hole, and it's not lined up one opposite each other, so he doesn't believe that the bedika will necessarily push the brain matter through the hole. When Zeiri went in Hardah, he sent back to the Bnei Babel, what I told you that you can't make a bedika, I was incorrect. Because this is what Rav Shimon Lakish said, Shlakish said that you can do a bedika using a yad, using this, putting into the mouth of the animal and pushing up, but you can't do a bedika using a nail by going over the place where the weasel bit and checking it by dragging the nail on it to see if you could feel indentation. Rabbi Yochanan said you could even check it with the nail. So you see that the Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan both held that you could do a bedika. So therefore, I'm being chayzik on what I said you can't. Or pluk the Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemya. This machlekes Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan is the same as a machlekes Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemya. Chad badik b'yada, v'chad badik b'machta. One would be badik using the hand, and one would be badik using a nail or a needle. Same idea. The one who would do by hand said to the one who did it by nail, he said, your method of checking is not as effective as mine, because by using a nail, you're going to sometimes cause the hole. So she's using a sharp thing. Sometimes it will poke the hole in the first place, and you won't realize that it just happened now. Therefore, you'll be wasting people's money. The one who holds that you check with a nail as opposed to by hand, he says, yeah, but your method is not so safe because, like we said before, maybe it's the holes are not lined up. There really is a hole, but nothing's coming through. It's not sufficient pressure. This is a shachat. The question is if it's a treif. It's not an avela. Ella treifus. He meant to say treifus. Shema nikav krum shel mayach. Because possibly he meant to say that it's a treif because maybe the krum, the membrane on the brain, was pierced. To stein Rabbi Yehudi, the badik biyada. So we just said one of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemiah. We didn't know which was which. The Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says that you badik biyad. The Tanya of Shimon Lazar, I'm Mishmer Yehuda. Baik and lechol biyad. Avaloi b'masma. He says you badik a bite of a weasel by the hand and not with a nail. Nishbar ha'etzem aval bishal nikav kum shamayach. And the Brisa continues, if the skull was broken, even though the membrane was not pierced, it's also going to be a treif, to stay. So l'chayr, that's a raya that Rabbi Yehuda is the man who says you check bayad. But this last part of the Brisa is very strange. Hagufa kasha. Amra baitkin l'chol da bayad avaloi b'masma. We say you could check the membrane of the brain by hand, but not with a nail. Alma isle b'dikusa. That means there is a b'dika. If you say that the breakage of the skull, which is on top of the membrane, already puzzled it, what b'dika is? There's no relevance to the b'dika. So I'm going to say that's talking about an animal, a oif that flies in the ocean or on the water. Since it doesn't have a membrane, it doesn't have a krum on top of its brain. In fact, you mean it doesn't have it at all? It has a very soft membrane, so therefore, as soon as it breaks through the skull, it's definitely going to die. That membrane can't stand up to anything.
And those don't have a bedika?
They don't have a bedika. Yeah, as soon as the skull breaks, they're automatically a treifa. Because it's so soft that it's inevitably going to break and the animal's going to die. It's going to die from this. Amalei Rav Nachman Rav Anan Mar Amar Shmuel Badik biyada umachsha. You check it by hand and it's kosher. Unachavrin Amarav Badik biyada umachsha. You check it by hand and you're machsha. Vatani Levi Trefa Shamanu Chacham Behema. The treifas that are effective by a behema, you have the same thing by oif. Yasser alein. In addition to them, oif nishbara etzem af bishanikav krum shalmaya. And we add on to that the skull was punctured without breaking the krum. It's also going to be a treifa. Amaleyahu ba'oif shalmayim hayil ve'in like krum. Same thing. Since it doesn't have a krum, it's going to. Well, that's where a oif is different. It's only the water-going aquatic birds. Ainly krum sakat. I don't mean it doesn't have a krum. El hayil kamrumay rach. Hahitan el goisa. There was a chicken, the Habibe of Chana, Shadr Lekame, that had this cholda was bitten by a cholda. Shadr Lekame der of Masna. It was brought to Rav Masna. Nishbar ha'etzem v'la'nikuf kum shalmaya chavoy. I'm sorry, it was the skull was broken, but the membrane was not pierced. And he said it's kosher. Amlei v'atani levi treva shamanu chacham b'behema connecting b'oiv yesterday and oiv nishbar ha'etzem av b'shanikuf kum shalmaya. We added on to them an oif that's going to be a trefe if its skull was pierced. Amalei hasan ba'oif shalmayim however in like krum and the krum sakadat aim ahil krumay rach. Again, the same analysis. Rav Shizbi bodik b'shimsha. Rav Shizbi used to be bodik this krum when you'd have a cholda that bit. He would be bodik it by the light of the sun. Rav Yema bodik b'maya. Rav Yema would be bodik it in water. He would inflate it with water and see if water leaked out. Rabbi Yaakov bodik begila the chitra. He would use a piece of wheat to be bodik it. Amrav Shizi hani avzi didan ka'if shamayim damyan. Our geese are like are considered an aquatic animal, and they have the same din that a rupture of the skull is also going to make it a treifa. Hey, Ashakayach, it's great to be back.
Well, sorry about the loss of your uncle.